Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our Subgrants for Partners Increasing the Number of Students Earning Industry Recognized Credentials, RemotEDx Subgrant Technical Assistance webinar. There's a few housekeeping items that we'd like to draw your attention to before we begin. So hopefully by now you've had a chance to see that in the upper right-hand corner of your Teams live event window, you can see that there's a little Q&A box at the top. So we want to make sure that you know how to navigate there, because that will be our primary way of communicating with you all. So thank you very much for attending, and you'll see that we will be publishing comments as we move along. One thing to note, there is about a 10 to 20 second delay between the time I say something and the time that you hear it. So if your question does not get immediately addressed, we will be sure to take a look at that Q&A before we adjourn our webinar. One thing that we would ask is if for some reason your question does not get answered at the conclusion of our webinar here today, if you would please email the RemotEDx irc@education.ohio.gov email with that particular question, and we'll be sure to get you an email response back so that we can have your contact information. So again, the primary way we'll be interacting with you and taking your questions is through the Q&A function on this Teams live event window, and we hope that you can access that well. We do have some moderators here that are going to be taking a look at our Q&As and helping to answer these questions today. So the first thing we'd like to do is really just welcome you all to this technical assistance webinar. This must mean that you and your partners are thinking creatively about how to ensure that students are prepared to earn industry recognized credentials, either this school year or next, and how we can better prepare our industry professionals and teachers in order to provide that remote instruction. So we're excited about the possibilities that are coming out of this grant, and we're really looking forward to reviewing your grant proposals here. So with that, my name is Cassie Paulsgrove. I'm a program administrator in the Center for Teaching, Leading, and Learning at the Department of Education. I lead our Career Connections and Success Bound efforts, which is really early college and career readiness efforts here at the department. I'm joined on our call here with our folks on the team to implement these RemotEDx credentials. Patty, do you want to go ahead and unmute and just introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, my name is Patty Guzman, and I'm a program administrator in the Office of Career Technical Education. I, along with Emma Nicholson, we manage the industry recognized credentials list and process for applying and reviewing.
Thanks, Patty. And then we also have some other folks from the Department of Education that are working on implementing grants here at the agency. So one of us here will be sure to take your questions and make sure that they're answered at the conclusion of our webinar. One thing that I'd ask is if you haven't already downloaded and pulled it up, if you could please locate the request for applications on the RemotEDx funding webpage and be sure that you have that document ready as you're listening to this webinar to really navigate through that RFA. I think that that will really help clarify some of the key questions that are coming in. So thanks everybody again for joining, and be sure to use that Teams Live Q&A feature as we begin here. So, and I'm going to ask Patty and my other folks on the Department of Education to take a look and watch that Q&A for me. And if there's a key question, don't hesitate, my partners, to unmute and just ask that question and we can get an answer to that. Okay, with that, we kind of want to give you an agenda of what we're going to cover this next hour. So the first is an overview of our instructional model status. So we all know that the pandemic has really changed education in Ohio, so we want to give you an overview of that. Then we really want to move into generally what the goals of RemotEDx are and what are the key foundational components of RemotEDx. Then we want to do like an overview of our subgrants for partners increasing the number of students earning industry recognized credentials, and really make that connection between remote education and the impetus for industry recognized credentials. Then we want to make sure that we get all of your questions answered and wrap up for our next steps. And hopefully by this technical assistance call, you'll have all your questions answered and you can really start drafting those co-design plans with your partners. First, we wanted to provide you all just an overview of how much change has happened in the landscape of remote education here in Ohio. As you can see, from September all the way to December, you see all kinds of different colors and through this heat map of how many school districts are offering 5-day in-person instruction versus hybrid versus fully remote. and then also those that were closed for a particular week as a result of the pandemic. So you can see that so much change has happened in way of transitioning to fully remote and hybrid educational models across the state. So for example, on December 17th, for example, you can see here this breakdown of how many students were experiencing remote education, either fully or in a hybrid status. So we're talking quite a few students in the state of Ohio that in some way, shape, or form are experiencing remote education, even half-time a week, all the way through every day. So this really laid the foundation as to why the Department of Education felt the need and compelled to ensure that our supports for high quality remote education were there. And so that's really what launched this idea of RemotEDx. So RemotEDx seeks to enhance, expand, and scale quality remote, hybrid, and blended education models. And something that's important to note, and we'll talk a little bit about this in just a minute, is that this is really laying a foundation for the future as well as in response to this pandemic. The goal of RemotEDx is to convene public and private partners to ensure that there's a coordinated direction and aligned resources for greater impact. So you'll see here in just a minute, all the different components of RemotEDx have really been thoughtfully designed to ensure that we are providing coordinated support to our school districts that are offering this type of education now and in the future. So this is such an important initiative that we have allocated $15 million from our federal CARES Act state activity funds to this particular initiative. And you'll see that there's many different support line items within those dollars. So RemotEDx, in the short term, aims to really coordinate remote education partners to support schools and districts right now. So in response to the pandemic, making sure that there's a coordinated remote education effort to provide technical assistance to schools that may need some access to broadband, may need some help in high quality practices for remote delivery of education. In the midterm, we're really hoping to transform remote caring, teaching, and learning opportunities in ways that ensure the whole child and wellness and success in a remote setting. So really focusing on that whole child and ensuring that all needs are met in a remote setting. And then long term, we're really hoping to lay the foundation to reimagine how to plan and deliver instruction using platforms that transform learning from in-person to remote or hybrid and blended, instantaneous at the flip of the switch if needed. So really laying the foundation for those platforms to be sustaining through the pandemic and beyond, to make sure that students are being served in a high quality fashion if for whatever reason remote education need to reemerge or be a foundation of education. So that led to the creation of 4 primary components of RemotEDx. So you'll see or you'll hear the term connectivity champions throughout this work. This is the boots on the ground folks that are assisting schools to overcome internet and connectivity barriers. So you'll see that our primary partners here are the Management Council and then our ITCs, which are our Information Technology Centers across the state. And just quickly to point, if you need this information more in depth, if you just Google search RemotEDx Ohio, you'll find the landing page for RemotEDx, and we can even get that URL right in the chat for you so that you can have this information after this technical assistance grant. So this Connectivity Champions is one core component. Another is the Exchange. So the Exchange is live now today. So if you visit the RemotEDx Exchange, you'll find high quality remote education practices and platforms. These are standards aligned instructional material and curriculum that have use case scenarios and professional learning supports for remote, blended, and hybrid education. Our primary partner here is InfoHio. We then have the Support Squad, which is really a solutions-focused technical support. Folks that are surrounding the state in educational service centers are ready and willing to help support you in your remote learning challenges and really finding solutions for those. So the Support Squad is a key component. And then lastly, one that we'll be rolling out here really soon is our Network and Learning Academy. So the goal is that we bring folks together in an intentional manner to create learning communities across the state that are focusing on particular problems of practice and really getting solutions to folks throughout this. So these are our 4 primary components of RemotEDx. And then today, you know, what we're really focusing on is this subgrant opportunity. So the additional components within RemotEDx are, number 1, the Ohio Collaborative Fund for Educating Remotely and Transforming Schools. So you can find that information again on the RemotEDx funding page, and it'll connect you to our partners page. So there are opportunities for grants on this particular grant fund. We then have 2 additional state-supported subgrants. One is a subgrant to nonprofit and community-based remote education partners. So that particular subgrant is, again, funding high-quality remote education projects. And then you'll see this particular grant that we're discussing here today, this subgrants for partners increasing the number of students earning industry-recognized credentials in a remote setting. So these other components are really key to rounding out our RemotEDx activities at this time. So with that, and before we jump into the particular subgrant, I want to make sure that any of your general questions on RemotEDx are answered. So I'm going to take just a minute to scroll through this Q&A. And it looks like many of the questions are directed to the specific grant. Quickly, I will answer. This recording will be available after this technical assistance. So we will post that on the RemotEDx funding page along with the grant announcement. So again, all of this information can be found on the RemotEDx webpage. I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to please drop that RemotEDx URL in the chat. So Patty, if you have that handy, if you could drop that in the Q&A as an announcement, that would be fantastic. If not, let me know and I'll do that. Okay, so many of these questions again are very specific to the grant opportunity. And it looks like maybe one particular question, what does the department view as the difference between hybrid and blended? And so, you know, that particular, you know, a very specific answer to that particular question are kind of in the works in terms of getting some definitions out the door so that folks can kind of see the difference. You know, anecdotally, and this is, you know, not a signed, sealed, delivered, approved Department of Education and answer to this question, but we're really using these terms very closely aligned. So blended and hybrid learning models both have in-person instruction components, but then also online learning components. So when we're talking about blending both in-person and remote education is how we're talking about hybrid and blended. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense. For a particular definition to each of those, we'll be working on sending out those definitions soon. So let's dive into this industry credentials subgrant overview. So knowing that RemotEDx is really all about really pushing high quality remote learning in this time, but then also beyond, so futuring really those supports and those networking opportunities. The RemotEDx Coordinating Council, which is kind of the steering committee of partners that are leading the RemotEDx work, we've all identified this immediate need to leverage well-positioned industry and education partnerships to support and provide services that aid students in remotely earning industry-recognized credentials. So industry-recognized credentials are a very important component of Ohio's workforce development strategy. So this is part of our Ohio graduation requirements as an opportunity to earn industry-recognized credentials. And this particular initiative has really built steam over the last 5 years. And so when RemotEDx was really brainstormed and designed, we knew that industry-recognized credentials needed to be a part of these remote learning supports so that students would still have access to earning these important tickets through graduation and post-high school. So this subgrant is really designed to provide some funds to think creatively about delivering that remote instruction and then ultimately helping students earn those industry-recognized credentials that will prepare them for high-demand jobs. And so we know that that landscape of workforce and the talent development pipeline has really changed with the pandemic. And so you'll see here, and we'll talk a little bit about it, we really tried to make sure that the credentials that we are promoting as a part of this grant are what we call pandemic proof. And we'll talk just a little bit about that here in a minute. So this is where we start to get very specific to this grant, and we're going to kind of get into the nitty-gritties of some of this. So first, the grant opportunity opened on January 7th, and it's going to close on February 12th. So again, the grants are due February 12th. If you are a winning application, you will receive notice of your grant award by March 12th, and the grant funds will be available through our grant management system, which is called the CCIP. They will be available beginning March 26th. So if you're thinking about your co-design plan and you want to keep these timelines in mind, it might be helpful in thinking about when and who will manage specific parts of your co-design plan. This is a reimbursement grant, and again, it is made possible by the CARES Act and the ESSER Fund, which the ESSER Fund is our very specific educational set-aside within the CARES Act. Subgrantees will be reimbursed for allowable expenditures based on submitted proposals, plans, and then most importantly, corresponding budgets. So reimbursements will be made upon those particular documentations in our grant management system. So grant funds must be obligated by June 30th. This means that you need to have your purchase orders in place and that you need to make sure that you have your projects paid for and underway by June 30th. And then your projects the money must be liquidated out of the CCIP, a zero balance, by September 30th. So invoices need to be paid, money needs to be drawn down no later than September 30th. And each of these are as of 2022. So you'll see you have more than a year to really get those funds spent down. If the awarded funds are not used by September 30th, 2022, the department does reserve the right to request that subgrantees forfeit that balance. Activity reports will be an important component of this grant. So we will need to make sure that we are keeping tabs on what activity is happening throughout the duration of your grant. And they will be due, and you can see here, an interim report will be due September of 2021. And then the final grant report, activity report, will be due September 1st, 2022. There are questions within the RFA, page 12, that will help you in guiding your co-design plan because it kind of shows you what is going to need to be included in the activity report. So if you take a look at page 12 of your RFA, you can see that what we're asking you to report on in your activity report can really be helpful in crafting your co-design plan. I'm going to pause there and check my questions. Are ESCs allowable applicants for this grant? We're going to cover that here in just a minute. How will proprietary solutions be handled in terms of sharing on the RemotEDx exchange? So that's an important part of this grant that we'll get to in just a little bit. But one of the requirements of accepting the grant is that you will share information on RemotEDx, and you'll have to determine how you handle proprietary solutions. So it may just be in the form of, there's a variety of ways that it might be able to be shared on RemotEDx, which we will dig more deeply into those details with our award winners on how exactly and what components of the grant activities will need to be connected to the RemotEDx exchange. What about career centers and other CTE delivery models that are already doing this? Is this not duplicating the work? So hopefully many of you are career tech centers that are on the call here today thinking about how you might expand your remote education offerings for credentials as a part of your partnerships. So, the goal is not to duplicate work here. The goal is to expand good work and to make sure that students who are not, currently served in remote settings for earning credentials are served. So this is really meant to serve a different population of student or to expand current good work so that more teachers, more students, more industry partners are being connected to this work in a meaningful way. So the goal is not to duplicate, the goal is to expand and to get creative with how we're moving this work forward. I think that—
Cassie, can you address can you clarify the competitive priority area of many Ohioans?
Yes, absolutely, which I think we'll talk about the competitive priorities here in just a little bit, but there's a very easy answer to this. It's basically the grant proposals that come in and propose to reach the largest number of students, the largest number of industry professionals or educators. Those are the ones that will receive the highest grant priority. So again, the most students and the most educators and industry partners. So again, the goal of this grant is to spur partnership between education and industry, which we know there's tons of examples across the state right now where that alignment and those partnerships are really solid. It's then to really build that partnership into a way for more educators / industry professionals and more students to receive training and earn certifications in these key areas. So basically the competitive grants that come in that have the highest number of estimated students, the highest number of estimated teachers and industry professionals will receive that grant priority. All right. Well, let's dig in and talk a little bit about funding details. So there is a total of $1 million that's available to award subgrants. This means that eligible applicants may request up to $150,000 to fund projects that address one or more of the competitive priorities. These are outlined on page 8 of the RFA if you want to follow along. I'm going to give you kind of a high-level overview of each of the funding priorities. And you'll see that in the RFA, there's far more detail that's kind of underneath of the grant priority. So please feel free to follow along on page 8 of the RFA here. So to kind of piggyback off of the question that was just asked, the RFA proposals that include the following will receive competitive preference. So number 1, a scope of work that accomplishes all 3 grant priorities, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. A scope of work that reaches many Ohioans, so who reaches the most students, the most industry and educators, and then the matching funds that are in-kind donations. A recommended match, including in-kind donations, is a minimum of 10% of the total grant award requested. So those are our 3 competitive preference priorities, and we can take any questions at this time on those.
I think someone asked a question, will this webinar be beneficial to a nonprofit organization looking to apply for the nonprofit RemotEDx grant, or will it be specific to the industry recognized credentials grant?
Yeah, that's a great question. So many of the overview pieces kind of transcend both grants. However, there was a technical assistance webinar for that particular grant that is posted. So we can get you the link to that. But again, it does live on the RemotEDx funding page. So to quickly answer your question, this one is focused on the industry credential grant. There is a webinar that's recorded and posted for the nonprofit partners grant. Okay. So let's talk a little more deeply around the competitive priorities. Those 3 really activity-driven priorities that we're looking for in the co-design plans. So the 3 activities that we're really looking to fund in this grant are to, number 1, deploy an awareness campaign around where students can get industry recognized credential training and even where those testing sites may be. So, you know, an example might be that a business advisory council wants to apply for this grant, knowing that they have on-the-job training centers, adult career technical centers that are offering credential training that might be accessible to even high school seniors, for example. So perhaps, you know, this particular business advisory council would like to see more students enrolling in those technical training programs targeted towards industry credentials. And they'd like, you know, a couple of $1,000s to really deploy this awareness campaign so that folks know where to go and how to get the training completed and where to take their test for credentials. So deploying an awareness campaign on where testing sites are, where credential training can happen is a competitive priority within this grant. Another competitive priority is to provide professional learning. So eligible applicants should provide a framework of professional learning opportunities for educators or other key professionals. So thinking about additional school staff that might be able to provide some short-term training around these industry recognized credentials, or really partnering with your industry representatives that will assist with credential training or mentoring that are identified within the partnership. So this professional learning competitive priority is not limited to only teachers, it's not limited to only industry professionals, it's not limited to only school staff. It's really meant to spur creativity about how we use our partners to provide that mentorship, to provide that on-the-job training, to provide that targeted credential training in a remote setting for our students to be able to provide them with the training they need to sit for the credential, to earn the credential as a test. So this again is a grant priority that's meant to spur creativity in this area. The last competitive priority is designing, developing, and implementing creative remote learning solutions for students. So priority 2 is really geared more towards adults, and priority 3 is really geared more towards students. So in this particular priority, eligible applicants should explain a plan for assisting students in earning qualifying credentials in a remote setting. So again, on page 8 in the RFA, there are even more details fleshed out of helping you think through what your co-design plan might look like for each of these competitive priorities. And I'm going to pause there to see if there are questions. What do you consider an in-kind donation? So we may talk about this again in the slide deck, but really an in-kind donation is time, is equipment that maybe a partner already has. So something that is not necessarily going to cost you additional money, but something that you already have that you're willing to put toward in this particular grant RFA. So if you're willing to, allow a half-time staff person that's dedicated to this project, for example, that might be an in-kind donation. In terms of prioritization, it appears that the primary focus is more on quantity involved versus a focus on involving underserved groups, correct? So there's not a particular focus or a metric or a quality indicator around underserved populations. It's really, just a general how many folks served in that. The population should reflect whatever student population is the priority group is working with. So for example, if the Business Advisory Council or the industry sector partnership that's applying for this grant is working in some of our major cities, the student demographic or the teacher demographic or the industry, partner demographic should mirror that of the service area. So again, we're not targeting any certain populations here with this grant. We're really helping to spur creativity for you all in the areas that you serve. Looks like for the matching funds, can it be a combination of types of funds? The short answer to that question is yes, it can be a combination of types of funds. Can you explain further about the matching funds? So again, this is really if as a partnership you're applying for this grant and your partners are willing to donate your time, talent, and treasure to these particular projects, that should be included as what you would like to take into account for your in-kind or matching donations. Money, matching funds is also a part of that too. So, if you have an industry partner or even educational service center partner that says, well, we're going to put $10,000 into this particular project too, in addition to whatever grant funds we may get, definitely include that into your proposals. Is RemotEDx worried about leaving out the rural schools using this competitive priority? Whoever asked that question, if you could provide me just a little bit more clarity on that, I think I could better answer that question. The goal is that we do serve rural schools and areas. So I know we have a great business advisory council in Southeast Ohio that's serving a lot of rural school districts and thinking about industry recognized credential implementation. So, we hope that this really helps spur some creativity in serving all kinds of students across the state of Ohio. Can teacher externships be included? If a teacher externship is in the spirit of helping them prepare for a particular credential so that they can in turn train students on that credential, yes, absolutely. What is the age of high school students that will participate? That will be decided by you all when you draft your co-design plan. So you all can include that particular information in your co-design plan. I think that hits all of the questions that we've gotten. Oh, we've got one more. For priority 3, if students participating in programs that are CTE funded, but where credentials may be added, does it have to be free for the students? We were thinking of sharing the process of delivering the credential as a grant funded opportunity and then turning it over to the partner schools to deliver now and forever that is designed. So whatever results from these grant dollars should be free to students at this time. So, for sustainability purposes, what model that you all plan for after this grant period, that would be wise to include in your co-design plan. So thinking about what the program looks like now versus in the future can definitely be included in your co-design plan. So to answer your question, projects must, that are coming out of these grant funds must be free to students. That's one of the particular priorities that we'd like to see accomplished in this. Will this include student help with transportation to co-op jobs? There was a question that was asked earlier about transportation costs. So in your budget narrative, be sure to include that information that if you'd like to use these dollars towards transportation. As of right now, there's no reason why transportation shouldn't be an allowable cost. So be sure to put that in your grant narrative. So to quickly answer the question, yes, you should be able to include transportation. Now, it should be transportation to industry recognized credential training. So if, for example, you've got a student who is studying or has a job placement, and in turn, they're going to earn a credential as a result of that job placement, then yes, transportation to that job will be included. But keep in mind, this is for credential training. Another question, with 2 RemotEDx subgrants out, can a partner in the application be a part of both or multiple applications for the same microgrant or subgrant? So I think we'll have to probably consult our grant management team on that. So I'm going to ask the person who, unless some of my partners on the call know the answer to this question more quickly than I do, I'm going to ask the person who asked that question to please email the RemotEDx IRC at education.ohio.gov that question. That way we can get you an email response back. That would be good. Can this include middle school scholars? This program and how you design and implement it is at you and your partner's discretion. If you would like to include some opportunities for middle school students to start learning some pieces of industry recognized credential bodies of work, by all means, please include that in your co-design plan. Okay, I think we're caught up on questions. So let's dive into a fairly complicated topic, which is the eligible versus the lead applicants. So this is all spelled out in page 5 in the RFA if you're following along. So again, this grant program is really meant to develop industry and education partnership-based approaches to the identified grant priorities that we just covered. So the subgrants are meant to fund co-design plans on behalf of these groups of people. So the eligible applicant in this case are business advisory councils, industry sector partnerships, other regional and state positioned workforce and industry groups, and then nonprofit organizations that are focused on education or student success. So if you're not familiar with these particular types of groups, we are happy to kind of do some investigating with you. And if you want to just say, hey, here's the group that I'm thinking is the eligible applicant, let me know what you think. Please, by all means, email those questions to RemotEDx IRC at education.ohio.gov so that we can get you a written response back. But the eligible applicant is the group, so the partnership. In many cases, groups like business advisory councils or even sometimes industry sector partnerships, they don't necessarily have a separate 501c3 or organization number and type. So in order for a business advisory council, for example, to apply, they're going to need, in some cases, to identify who the lead applicant within their business advisory council is. So let's talk briefly about the difference between a lead applicant and an eligible applicant. If an eligible applicant is not eligible to receive an IRN for fiscal purposes, which an IRN is the number that the Ohio Department of Education uses to identify various organizational types. We have a page on our website that kind of lists out all of the different types of organizations that the department recognizes, and we can help you get set up with an IRN once you've received notice that you've won the award. So if you're not familiar with the IRN process, no worries, we're going to handhold through that process, but you do need to know if you're eligible for one or not. Because if you are an eligible applicant, so you're a regional workforce group who is assembled, you need to know if you're eligible for an IRN or not, which that link is in the RFA on page 5 for you to be able to take a look at. So while the eligible applicant is going to be named as the grant awardee, the lead applicant is the entity in which the funds will be awarded. So you might be a key partner on a business advisory council. So the business advisory council is going to receive the grant award or be named the grant awardee. But then you as the lead applicant, you might be the educational service center, for example, that runs the business advisory council. You, in that case, could be the lead applicant, and you will receive the funds to fund the co-design plan that was developed with your business advisory council partners. If the lead applicant is a school district, there are added requirements to receiving this grant, just as a heads up. So there are non-public equitable services requirements that come with receiving these funds, as well as other kind of requirements of the grant. I'm going to pause there because I'm sure there's questions. My ESC runs the Business Advisory Council, so they can be the applicant. So we're going to be very particular about our language here. They can be the lead applicant. The eligible applicant is the Business Advisory Council, and the co-design plan needs to reflect that the members of your Business Advisory Council were a part of that grant proposal. So the ESC can be the lead applicant for the Business Advisory Council. Can an ESC's Business Advisory Council apply for this grant twice, one for each target industry partner credential? You know, this particular grant, I would encourage you to really think about a thoughtful co-design plan that, accomplishes those 3 grant priorities in one fell swoop. Unless my, grant management partners on the call see there to be a huge dilemma with this, there's no reason why you couldn't submit more than one application. You're just now competing against yourself in a variety of ways, along with, other folks that have submitted RFAs. So I would be very thoughtful about that, but there's nothing saying that you can't. Can you give those emails and names of contact people again? It was a little fast. So really the only email box that you need to get with is RemotEDx IRC at education.ohio.gov. And maybe Patty can respond and give you that email. It looks like she's typing right now. Thank you. We are reviewing the list. Here's another question. We are reviewing the list of pandemic-proof industry recognized credentials, and none of them are currently related to data analytics. So we're going to cover that particular list here in just a minute. So we'll dig into that question here in just a minute. Another question, is there a want of college credit being awarded for these credentials? Is there a want of, that's a great question. Anytime that a college partner, an institution of higher ed partner is willing to give prior learning credit for that particular credential, or however you work out those seamless dual credit options for students that are earning credentials, that's always best case scenario, because now students really they have college credit in their back pocket and they've got this industry certification in their back pocket. So I would say that, if that's an opportunity for students in your region, definitely ensure that that's in your co-design plan, because that will definitely be a shining example of how we can really partner business and education. Can individual schools participate in multiple grant applications? So we're gonna research that just a little bit more around, can organizations be a part of multiple grant proposals, and we'll get back to you. So if you could email your question to that RemotEDx IRC at education.ohio.gov, that would be very helpful. Looks like there's another question. Could a vendor offer free or reduced cost for match? So if they're going to be on your co-design team, I would definitely include that in your co-design plan, and I would encourage you to make sure that those folks that you're going to be partnering with to deploy and really implement this program that you're going to apply for be a part of that co-design team. Good questions. Are workforce development boards eligible to be the lead applicant? Yes, there is excuse me. We have an identified organization type for you. So yes, you are eligible to be a lead applicant. Okay, let's move on and see if we can get some of these other questions answered as we move along. So let's talk a little bit about developing your co-design plan with your partners. The eligible and the lead applicant should consult all partners in their consortia on the development of their co-design plan. So just as we talked about putting the vendor on your co-design team, I would absolutely encourage you to make sure that those partners are included in your plan. K-12 institutions must be a key partner in the development of the plan. So if you're a workforce development board or you're a business advisory council, the K-12 institutions in which these students reside have to be a part or a key partner within your plan. So this includes career technical center students, entities, this includes joint vocational school districts, this includes your traditional high schools and non-public and public partners within this. So the K-12 institutions need to be a key partner in the development of your plan. I saw a question in the chat around what is needed to show a partnership agreement. And, we might cover this here in the future, but I just want to hit it here. Really a signed letter is the best way to show a partnership agreement. There's also opportunities when answering those co-design plan questions where you can highlight who your partners are and who plan to take on particular sections of your plan. So I would encourage you to put your partners in both, well, in a couple of places. There's a place in the application where you'll list your partners, make sure that they're showing up in your co-design plan, and then also those signed letters of partnership will be key in showing partnership. Okay, this is where we get really nitty gritty. So in many of our Department of Education grants, you'll see both technical and quality elements that will be used in scoring to determine who awardees will be. So let's talk a little bit about the technical elements, and this can be found on page 9 of your RFA. So if you're following along, flip to page 9. So there are just some very basic pieces of information that we need in order to even accept and review your application. So the first one is the applicant name and organization. On your application, you'll see that there's a section for you to identify who the eligible applicant is. And then if you need to name a lead applicant, there's a section for both there. The lead applicant will be who is receiving the funds. So if your eligible applicant and your lead applicant are the same, you can even just put them twice. We need your mailing address, including your city, state, and zip code. We need the application contact, so who is submitting the application, including their position and phone number and email. We also then need to know who's going to be monitoring this grant or managing the grant after it's been awarded. Then we need their information, including phone number and email address. We need to know what type of organization you as the lead applicant or eligible applicant are. And then again, those proof of partnerships and co-design approach with your district partners as a part of all of these technical elements. So these 6 are key in order to even allow for your application to be reviewed. I'm going to pause there and see if there's any technical elements questions. Our district has an educational foundation. Is it possible for the foundation to be the lead applicant? That's one of those particular cases that we might need to brainstorm with you a little bit and dig in just a little bit further. So for example, we need to know if that, foundation, I'm assuming they do, your foundation has some type of a entity number with the state and all that good stuff. So for the person who asked the educational foundation question, if you could please email that to RemotEDx IRC at education.ohio.gov, we'll get you a specific answer on that. Can recognized 12-point credentials that are on the pre-apprenticeships be included in the allowed credentials? We're going to talk more deeply about the credential list here in just a minute, so I'm going to save that question. Is the goal to plan/develop or expand new credential to be available in the fall of 2021? It looks like Patty might be replying there, but really the goal is kind of twofold. It really is meant to spur expansion for remote opportunities for students to earn credentials that are currently existing and to spur new opportunities where they don't currently exist. Preliminarily, there's been a downtick in the number of students who have earned credentials between the 19 school year and the 20 school year, as I'm sure you all can imagine. So the goal is to really ramp up those remote education options for credentials so that we don't continue to see this downtick in the number of students earning credentials. So we really want to help expand current offerings, but also spur creativity for new offerings as well.
I guess I also want to make sure that they were also not asking in addition to that, but possibly even asking if they are trying to suggest a new credential for the list. I'm not sure.
Oh,
which one? I mean, I will put a link to the process for adding new industry recognized credentials to the list just in case that is what they meant.
okay.
But Cassie is correct in her response as well.
Great. That's great. Yes, and we can talk a little bit more about the, how the which credentials qualify and which ones don't here in just a little bit, and we can connect you to where, again, Patty's going to put in the link on if you have a particular credential that you don't see on our graduation list, there's a whole separate process for that we'll connect you to. Can the funds be used for a project manager's time? So I'm going to really lean heavily on my grant management friends that are on the call here to correct me being wrong inevitably. So at one point, in the published RFA, there was a section that said indirect costs were not allowable for this particular grant. And so, luckily the federal government came back and said, folks can really use this grant, including indirect costs if you'd like. So the short answer to that question is, yes, put that in your co-design plan or actually in your budget narrative too, that, you want to hire as a part of this project, a project manager's time as a part of this grant. And that will be included in the RFA process, the qualitative process. Hopefully I didn't say anything too wrong there.
Yep. Now you got, if this is Brian, I'll add to that. So yes, so indirect cost rate is allowable. Sorry, indirect costs are allowable, and you're just going to want to have an approved rate. If you do not have an approved rate with the department, just let us know, and we'll make sure you get the de minimis rate, and then we'll make sure that's built into your budget. So again, I'm Brian with Grants Administration.
Thanks, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you all have questions that you want to run by us to see a particular, it's kind of the same but a little different, please feel empowered to email RemotEDx irc@education.ohio.gov, and we'll get experts like Brian on the question and get you a response back as soon as possible for those particular instances. Okay, so let's talk about quality elements. So, you've drafted this great co-design plan, or you're about to draft this great co-design plan. How are we going to score them to see who gets the grant funds and who doesn't? This particular section is in page 9 of the RFA. And so you'll see here that there are 7 quality elements that are going to be scored as a part of this grant process. There's even the rubric for how we will score them on a scale of 0 to 3 on your particular grant. So number 1 thing we'll be scoring is the competitive priorities. So the eligible applicant must identify the competitive priority or priorities for which they are applying, and remember that a competitive preference will be given to those that are drafting co-design plans that accomplish all 3. So, there's some type of an awareness campaign that's happening in the region, along with professional learning opportunities and opportunities for students to earn credentials. So the co-design plans that do all 3 will have competitive preference. And you'll see here that the co-design plan is an important part of this. So providing a justification for how the competitive priority will be addressed, explaining how the partnership has the capacity to meet the objectives, and then clearly describe the co-design plan, including all of the objectives and how this serves students in a remote setting, and also highlight how the plan serves underserved students. All of this information will be taken into account in the scoring process. You need to also have a project timeline, a budget narrative, a budget worksheet. You're going to certify your grant assurances, and then also demonstrate your proof of partnership. So this includes a letter from each education partner and other partners that will have a hand in co-designing the proposal and implementing the program. So these are the 7 quality elements that will be scored as a part of the application process. I'm going to pause there to see if there's any questions. Oh, Brian, we got one for you here. Can indirect costs now be included in the subgrants for community and non-profit RFA that's currently open too?
Yes.
Yes, that was a quick.
It's an easy answer. Yes.
That's great. Okay, so I would highly suggest, and you all know this, especially those of you that are experienced grant writers, I would highly suggest that you take a deep look at these quality elements as you're drafting your co-design plan, because that that rubric or that scoring descriptions section, along with these 7 quality elements, can really help drive the pieces of your co-design plan. Along with, again, take a peek at those activity report metrics that are going to be required, because the more you start to flesh that detail out in your co-design plan, the easier it will be once you've been awarded the funds. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the scoring rubric itself. This is page 10. This is a very high level criteria for a grant. And so each of those sections that you saw there will be scored using this rubric. So we're going to ask grant reviewers to use a score of 1, 2, or 3 for each of those sections. A score of 1 is just a poorly developed section or non-existent, really. This means like the response is significantly incomplete. A score of 2 is just adequately developed. So the score means the response meets the established criteria, but it requires additional information or explanation or detail to fully demonstrate the potential. But then a score of 3 means that the response demonstrates the applicant's collaborative, innovative, and impactful approach to responding to the competitive priority. So using that rubric, more is better in fleshing out the details of your co-design plan and your included proof of partnerships, as well as those additional elements that are in the quality element section. I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions. Yes. One question, does the credential need to be earned totally remote, or is hybrid acceptable? So you'll see in the grant RFA section around this particular competitive priority, there are times where a particular credential requires there to be on the job training of some kind or work with equipment. So that means that a student or a teacher, if they're earning the credential, or an industry professional to be able to teach it, they're just going to have to come in at some point to either use the equipment or something. So really, in that vein, a hybrid approach is totally acceptable when you're thinking about the logistics of the particular credential or set of credentials that you're wanting to lift up a program for. So it definitely can be a hybrid situation, as long as it's accessible to all students. So thinking about transportation, things like that would be important. What does certify a grant assurances mean? This is fairly easy. It means that the entity that's applying for the grant signs off that they are accepting the assurances that come, the responsibilities that come with taking this grant on. So your grant manager, your lead applicant, points of contact would be important people to think about certifying the grant assurances. Another question, is the focus to provide the training to earn the credential, or is it to make sure the students earn the credential? COVID provided challenges and students were unable to take the credential training, hence the decline in credentials earned. There are still agencies which are not permitting testing or are 6 to 8 months behind. How will this impact the receipt of funds? So luckily the grant period is spending is allowable through 2022. So really aiming for that June deadline, but knowing that funds can be expended for through through September 2022 will be helpful to keep this in mind. So the focus is to make sure students earn the credential. Students can't earn the credential unless they've been trained on the particular credential, which is kind of how the 3 grant priorities emerged. Like number 1, students have to know that there's training / testing sites even available. Number 2, adults in their life have to be ready to help them learn what it takes to earn the credential. And then, number 3, the designing and deploying programs that will help train and prepare students to sit for the credential. That can be focused on both the training and the actual test, or if the test is involved, or the demonstration, the performance, depends on the credential. So it's really twofold. Like really, the goal is for more students to earn credentials. You'll just need a lot of different pieces in order to make sure that that end goal is accomplished. This is a question specifically for Brian. How do we get the approved rate for indirect costs?
Sure. If you go to the department's website and search Grants Administration, and on our webpage, there's the indirect cost packet, and you just fill out the packet and then submit it to us, and then you'll have an approved rate with the department. If you don't have a rate, I mentioned earlier, we can give you what we call a de minimis rate of, I think it's 10%, but you just have to let us know, because what we have to do is make sure that that amount is budgeted in the CCIP for in the e-grant system. So again, you can apply by going to the website and getting the indirect cost rate packet, or just let us know that you need the de minimis rate.
And if you need more specifics on that, or you need something in writing, just email that RemotEDxIRC@education.ohio.gov, and we'll get you an email response back.
Yes.
And I see that we're very quickly running out of time, so I'm going to fly through these other questions and then make sure that we hit our other key talking points and try to answer the duration of the questions. So the next question, would you recommend that the grant provides an array of ways for providing credentials and options be available to students, or should the grant focus on one or two industry recognized credentials? I think that question is a key question to ask your co-design team and the partners that are within your organization that's the eligible applicant. Each region and even each county, even each city needs something different in terms of workforce for the future. So that particular question is a great one to spur this co-design plan in my mind. There's credentials that rise to the top of being transferable across career fields, so that may be a logical place to focus. There's also very specific workforce needs that have emerged in this pandemic and have been there since before the pandemic. So really consulting your industry professionals in that question would be my recommendation. There's some questions on the grant review process. We will have multiple grant reviewers. So there's going to be a team of folks that are reviewing the grant. And additionally, how will they be trained to ensure that the rubrics are consistent in their grading? We're going to host a reviewer training similar to this, where we walk through every single, and even more detailed, every single grant priority and the particular aspects of the scoring rubric with them. So we will calibrate first with all of our grant reviewers, and it will be a team of multiple reviewers. So you'll actually see, if you're in the subscribe to Ed Connection, we're actually doing an all call for grant reviewers even just today to really get some quality professionals looking at these grant applications and scoring them. So if you know some folks that would be interested in reviewing grants, by all means send the invite their way. But we are looking for qualified reviewers in the grant areas. So they'll be asked to turn in some information for us on that. Can ODE provide, next question. Can ODE provide a report or list on the most commonly earned credentials across the state? Yeah, great question. So that information we have at the agency, it's just not publicly available right now. So if you shoot an email to that inbox, we can definitely get you some information on that. Last question I'm going to take and then finish up with the slide deck, and then we'll transition back to questions. Do all partners have to be Ohio-based providers? For example, if we partnered with training organization that provides industry recognized credential training and apprenticeships, but is located outside of Ohio, the goal is for Ohio students to earn more credentials. So the students served and the professionals served through the grant funds, the program, the goal is that Ohioans are served by the program that you're developing. If you need a little more detail to that, shoot us an email and we'll draft a response that way, or set up some time to talk with you more specifically about that. Okay, subgrant awards. So subgrant awardees will be invited. So if you're a winner of one of these grants, you'll be invited to a webinar that will provide you additional information. So applying for an IRN, connecting with our grants management system, which is called the CCIP, once award determinations have been made. So if you're brand new to applying for anything for the Ohio Department of Education, which many of you probably are, no worries. We're going to schedule sometime the week of March 22nd a time to really handhold and walk you through that process. Again, this grant goal is to spur creative solutions in this space and really drive home partnerships. Oh, good. Look at that timing. Very good. So now we're going to kind of flesh out some more questions. Unless, Patty, do you have any particular points to add that I might have missed before we adjourn here?
No, just if we can get through any more of the Q&A.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Good questions coming in. One that just caught my eye. Another question. If I'm a reviewer, can my agency still submit a grant? When you're a reviewer, when you're asked to be a reviewer, there's going to be a very detailed conflict of interest statement. If you are confident that there is not a conflict of interest, then you can be a grant scorer, or opposite, your organization can apply for the grant. If you are in any way in conflict of interest of those that are applying for the grant, you cannot be a grant scorer. And so we have a process that we will use to flesh out who has a conflict of interest and who does not. Another question, is a coordinator's salary an eligible expense outside of the indirect cost? I think, can you go ahead and email us that question? So RemotEDxIRC@education.ohio.gov. I think we need to dig a little bit more into that and how it would be outside of an indirect cost. So please email us that and we'll get you a more specific answer. And then, can TechGrid tie into this program? So this is a great question. In the grant RFA, we did put in there that grantees should take into consideration how they might be able to use TechCred as a part of their co-design plan. So for those of you that might not be aware, Ohio has a grant program, or it's really just a program to allow for employers to upskill or reskill their current staff by paying to help them earn an industry recognized credential. So employers are eligible to apply for that. Now keep in mind, a school district and educational service center are all also employers. So really TechCred could be used, and there is a separate qualifying list of credentials, but TechCred can be used to offset the cost of training teachers, training other professionals to earn a particular credential so that they may be well equipped to help students earn the credential as well. So yes, absolutely take into consideration TechCred. And we might have lost a slide here, so I want to kind of go back a little bit to a set of questions that I thought we were going to get to, but maybe not. In the RFA, we took some time to identify what we kind of termed pandemic-proof credentials. Now, these were suggested credentials to get the planning process started for potential eligible applicants. The list that is included in the RFA is, again, to generate an idea. If you did not see a credential on that list in the request for applications that you would like to fund a program for, the only requirement is that our credential list be the key component of what credential you're applying for. So let me say that differently. If you did not see the credential that you'd like to lift a program up for on the RFA, check out Ohio's approved list of credentials for K-12 students. If it's on that list, then you can use the co-design plan as an opportunity to justify why that credential should be included, even though it's not on the RFA list. So for those of you that were asking questions previously about data analytics, for example, check out the department's approved list, and by all means, please include that in your co-design plan. And I believe someone put on here that, you know, data and tech is a key initiative of the Lieutenant Governor's office, and you're absolutely right. So that's a perfect justification as to why this grant opportunity should fund tech-related credentials. So I say all that to say, don't worry if the credential that you were hoping isn't necessarily on the RFA list. Check out the department's approved list, and if it's there, then it's also eligible to be funded here. The list that's included in the RFA was really to generate a thoughtful discussion about what would be sustainable for students to earn in a pandemic and beyond, and in a remote setting. So again, use that list to kind of spur ideas, and it's not the end all be all. Patty put in here, if you would like to review the full list of questions and answers from today, we're going to be posting a frequently asked questions on the RemotEDx funding page. So please consult that URL for a recording of this session and a subsequent frequently asked questions sheet, along with all of the information like the application, the request for applications. All of that information should be found on that web page. So with that, it looks like we're 4 minutes over, and I don't see any new questions. So I think we're going to go ahead and adjourn for today. We can't thank you enough for joining us and for being a part of this session today. We are, again, very excited about the potential programs that will result from these dollars, and seeing how students can earn these credentials in a remote setting. So thank you all very much. and there will be a link to the webinar on that RemotEDx funding page. And if you did not get your question answered today, we'll absolutely take your questions to the RemotEDx email, which is remotedxirc@education.ohio.gov. So with that, we're going to conclude today's session. Thank you all.